They asked Jesus, which is the greatest commandment? We don't find that he asked them, but we can tell from what he told them that they asked. He said, the greatest commandment is thus. And he did not name any of the 10. He said, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your might, with all of your strength. And then you love your neighbor like you love yourself. This is the greatest of the commandments. And he said, this is actually what the rest of the commandments hang upon. These are the two fundamental principles of Jesus' religion. When you want to know what Jesus' religion was, he said it was this: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your strength, and then you love your neighbor like you love yourself. And it's very interesting. I'm going to step off in just a small side note. It's very interesting, as now I am working on a PhD in Islamic law, that the fundamental principle of Islamic law and the religion of Islam is this: there are two sets of principles that everything in Islam hangs upon. The first principle is that you love the Lord with the Lord your God with all your might, with all your heart, with all your strength. You give God His due right of worship. That's one side. On the other side, that you love your neighbor as you love yourself. This is Islamic law. And everything else descends from these two principles. Every law that you can find in Islam fits in one of these two categories. Either the rights that you give to the Creator, or the rights that you give to the creation. And this is what Jesus Christ Himself is teaching. So now I begin to question myself, and I'm saying that, wait a minute. I'm finding a Jesus in the New Testament that taught that God was the greatest thing in creation, that you worship Him and obey Him, and you go to heaven. This is what I found God teaching in the Old Testament. So what about the salvation, the crucifixion? Where is all of this now sitting and resting? How does it rest on this point? And this is where I'm going to begin to wrap it up, as they say, and tie a bow on it. Because there's so much more, but I don't have the time. I have some DVDs available for you guys that are outlining all of these things. But I want to get to the point, which is salvation. I started to question the crucifixion. And so I started to read the crucifixion story out of Matthew, out of Mark, out of Luke, and out of John. And if I gave you all of the reasons why I got to my conclusion, we would be here forever. But I want to give you the point. And I did not really realize the point in the beginning, first reading through the first 4 Gospels, because I was conflicted, because here is seemingly a Jesus who came to live a life and die on a cross and shed His blood for the redemptions of sins. There are implicit verses in the New Testament that said that this was Jesus saying that this is why I'm here, to shed my blood for the redemption of your sins. But yet when the people came to Him and told Him that they're going to crucify you, we find a Jesus who was unwilling. We find a Jesus who was very unwilling. So unwilling that He took His disciples, went to the Garden of Gethsemane, told them, you stand here and watch so that nobody can get me. I'm going down here. He falls on His face. He prays so hard that His sweat becomes as drops of blood. And His prayer is not for strength. His prayer is not for the ability to be able to withstand the punishment that He's coming upon. No. His prayer was, God, if it be, let this cup pass from me. Meaning, God, don't let them crucify me. So I'm very conflicted now about this Jesus who is supposed to be crucified for the sins of humanity. Why is He reluctant to take this mission? And I couldn't figure it out until I started to read the writings of Paul, which I had read before, but now I'm reading them with a completely different frame of mind. And when I got to the book of Galatians, the light bulb turned on for me, and it all fell into place. First of all, I found out that Paul puts himself directly at contradiction with the teachings of Jesus Christ. Paul taught that the law, God's law, was not a method in salvation. He spends a lot of time doing this. That God's law was not a method in salvation, that it should not be followed. That it should be abandoned, and people who come into Christianity that are not Jews should not follow God's law. And he even writes a letter called Galatians, which is to the church at Galatia. And he begins the letter by saying, "Oh, you foolish Galatians, why are you still following this accursed law?" And all I could remind myself of was Jesus saying that whosoever shall break the least of the commandments and then teach people to break the commandments would be the worst or least person in the kingdom of heaven. But Paul says something very profound in Galatians. He says that Christ was crucified and cursed. He was cursed according to the law, in order to remove us from the curse of the law. For it is written, everything that hangeth on a tree is cursed. And he was quoting Deuteronomy. So I was like, wait a minute, why did Paul go to this length to explain this crucifixion as a curse to remove us from the curse of the law? So I started to read Deuteronomy and the Jewish law. And what happened was all of the light bulbs fell into place. In Deuteronomy, God teaches that if you crucify a criminal, which is the worst capital punishment that you can have in Judaism, in the Hasidic Jewish law. If you crucify a criminal, to hang them, but do not let them stay on the cross overnight. If they are not dead, you break the legs, you let them die, but you take them down that night and you bury them that